Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the briefing room at Kandahar Airfield, her flight suit crisp despite the Afghan heat that leaked through every crack in the temporary structure. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete floor, and the smell of strong coffee mixed with jet fuel hung in the air. She had been in country for 3 months, flying close air support missions in her A-10 Thunderbolt II, the aircraft affectionately known as the Warthog by those who flew it and loved it. Colonel James Bradford entered the room with the kind of presence that made everyone straighten their backs without thinking. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with gray touching his temples and a chest full of ribbons that told stories of a career spent in the cockpit of F-16, fighting Falcons. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had logged thousands of hours in some of the military's fastest and most advanced aircraft. The briefing was supposed to be routine. Intelligence had identified a Taliban stronghold in the Helmand province that needed immediate attention. Ground forces were requesting air support for an operation scheduled to begin at dawn the following day. What made this briefing different was the nature of the mission itself. The target was situated in a narrow valley, surrounded by steep mountains and unpredictable winds that could turn deadly in seconds. Colonel Bradford spread a map across the table, his finger tracing the route to the target area. Sarah leaned forward, studying the terrain with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read mountains like others read books. The valley was tight, maybe 2 miles wide at its broadest point, with peaks rising over 10,000 feet on either side. "We need precision on this one," Bradford said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "The enemy has been using this location to stage attacks on our convoys. Intelligence suggests they're storing weapons and possibly holding hostages. The Marines will be going in on the ground, and they'll need air cover from the moment they cross the valley entrance." Another pilot, Captain Ryan Torres, nodded from across the table. He flew an F-18 Super Hornet and had recently transferred from a carrier in the Persian Gulf. "What's the weather looking like, sir?" he asked. "Unpredictable," Bradford replied. "Morning fog in the valleys, wind shear along the ridgelines. We're looking at a narrow window for the operation." Sarah had flown in conditions like these before. The A-10 was built for exactly this kind of mission. Low and slow, she could maneuver through tight spaces that faster jets couldn't navigate safely. The Warthog's titanium bathtub protecting the cockpit and its redundant systems meant she could take hits and keep flying, but she also knew that officers like Bradford, who had spent their careers in fast movers, sometimes viewed the A-10 as outdated. "I'll take it," Sarah said, her voice steady. Bradford looked at her, and something flickered across his face. It wasn't quite dismissal, but it was close. "Captain Mitchell, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this mission requires speed and precision. We need to get in and out fast." "The A-10 is perfect for this, sir," Sarah responded. "The valley is too narrow for high-speed approaches. The Marines will need sustained cover, not just a quick pass. My aircraft can loiter over the target area and provide continuous support." Torres leaned back in his chair, watching the exchange with interest. A few other pilots in the room shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew Sarah's reputation. She had logged more combat hours in the past 3 months than most pilots saw in a year. Her call sign, Hawkeye, had been earned through countless missions where her precision with the A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon had saved ground troops from impossible situations. Bradford's jaw tightened slightly. "The mission profile calls for speed, Captain. We can't afford to have a slow-moving aircraft vulnerable in that valley any longer than necessary." "With respect, sir, speed isn't the primary concern here," Sarah said, keeping her tone professional but firm. "The terrain and the nature of close air support favor the A-10's capabilities. I can fly lower, slower, and more accurately than any fast mover. The Marines will need someone who can stick around when things get hot." The colonel's eyes hardened. He wasn't used to having his tactical decisions questioned, especially not by junior officers. But Sarah wasn't backing down. She had seen too many situations where the right aircraft made the difference between success and disaster. "Any jet will work for this mission, Captain," Bradford said, his voice taking on an edge. "This isn't about your aircraft. It's about following the tactical plan." Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising but kept it in check. She had heard variations of this argument throughout her career. The A-10 was old, some said. It was vulnerable, others claimed. But those criticisms usually came from people who had never flown the Warthog, never felt how it responded to your hands, never experienced the unique connection between pilot and machine that the A-10 offered. "I understand, sir," she said carefully. "But I've studied the terrain, and I've flown missions in similar valleys. The A-10's maneuverability at low speeds will be essential. If the Marines encounter resistance and need us to make multiple passes in tight quarters, the Warthog can do things that faster aircraft simply can't." Bradford stood up straighter, and the room seemed to grow smaller. "Captain Mitchell, I've been flying combat missions since before you were in high school. I know what works and what doesn't. The mission plan calls for an F-18 to provide initial air support, with additional assets on standby if needed." Torres looked between Sarah and the colonel, clearly uncomfortable with the tension building in the room. The other pilots remained silent, their eyes fixed on their notes or the map, anywhere but the confrontation unfolding before them. Sarah knew she was pushing the boundaries of military protocol. Challenging a superior officer's tactical decisions in front of other pilots was risky. But she also knew that the Marines on the ground deserved the best possible support, and her gut told her that the A-10 was the right tool for this job. "Sir, I'm not questioning your experience," Sarah said. "I'm offering an alternative perspective based on my aircraft's specific capabilities. The A-10 was designed for exactly this kind of mission. Fiver for that. Armancid. Fiver for that. Fiver for that. Armancid. Fiver for that. Fiver for that. Fiver for that." Bradford's face remained impassive, but his eyes told a different story. He saw her persistence as insubordination barely disguised as professional disagreement. "Your perspective is noted, Captain. However, the decision has been made. Captain Torres will fly the primary air support mission in his F-18. Torres nodded, though he didn't look particularly happy about being thrust into the middle of the disagreement. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. She could push further, could make a formal objection, but that would likely end her involvement in the mission entirely, and possibly damage her career. Or she could accept the decision and hope that everything went according to plan. "Understood, sir," she said finally, her voice neutral. Bradford seemed to relax slightly, taking her acquiescence as the end of the discussion. "Good. Captain Torres, you'll launch at 0500 hours. The Marines cross the line of departure at 0530. Weather permitting, you'll have clear skies for your approach." The briefing continued with the technical details of the mission. Sarah listened, making mental notes. But part of her mind was already running through scenarios. She knew the valley, had studied dozens like it. The wind patterns, the way fog could suddenly roll in from the peaks, the unpredictable downdrafts that could slam an aircraft into the ground without warning. When the briefing ended, the pilots filed out into the bright Afghan morning. Sarah walked toward the flight line, where her A-10 sat waiting. The aircraft looked almost prehistoric compared to the sleek F-18 seconds and F-16 seconds parked nearby. Its twin turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage, the massive 7-barrel rotary cannon protruding from the nose. The straight wings designed for maximum loiter time rather than speed. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the rivets and panels beneath her fingers. This aircraft had brought her home from missions that would have destroyed lesser planes. It had absorbed ground fire, shrugged off damage, and kept flying when any reasonable machine should have fallen from the sky. Her crew chief, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera, walked up beside her. He was a stocky man in his 30s who treated the A-10 like it was his personal responsibility to keep it flying. "Heard you got into it with the colonel," he said. "News travels fast," Sarah replied. "Flightline's a small world, Captain," Rivera said with a slight smile. "For what it's worth, I agree with you. This bird was made for missions like tomorrow's." Sarah appreciated the support, but it didn't change the reality. Bradford's made his decision. Torres gets the mission. Rivera was quiet for a moment, then said, The aircraft's ready if you need it. Fully loaded, systems checked, fuel topped off. Thanks, Marcus, Sarah said. She looked out toward the mountains in the distance, their peaks still catching the last light of the setting sun. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Marines were preparing for tomorrow's operation. They would be checking their weapons, going over their plans, trusting that when things went wrong, as they inevitably did in combat, the air support would be there. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk, unable to sleep. She kept running through the mission profile in her mind. The valley, the weather, the terrain, every instinct she had told her that the F-18, despite its advanced capabilities, was the wrong aircraft for this particular job. But Bradford had been clear, and she had to trust that Torres was a good enough pilot to handle whatever came up. At 3 a.m, she gave up on sleep and headed to the operations center. The night shift personnel barely looked up as she entered, their attention focused on monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds from across the region. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and studied the latest weather reports. The fog was going to be worse than predicted. Meteorological data showed a low-pressure system moving into the area, bringing with it reduced visibility and unpredictable winds. She felt her stomach tighten. This was exactly the kind of condition that made high-speed approaches dangerous. Torres walked in an hour later, already in his flight suit. He looked tired, and Sarah wondered if he had slept any better than she had. "Morning," he said, pouring his own coffee. "How are you feeling about the mission?" Sarah asked. Torres hesitated, then shrugged. "Honestly, I wish you were flying it. But orders are orders." The admission surprised her. "You'll do fine," she said, meaning it. Torres was a skilled pilot, even if his aircraft wasn't ideal for the job. "I hope so," Torres replied. "Those Marines are counting on us." They stood in silence for a moment. Two pilots united by the weight of responsibility they both carried. Then Torres checked his watch. "I better get to the aircraft. Pre-flight takes time." Sarah watched him go, then made a decision. She wasn't scheduled to fly, but she was going to be ready anyway. If something went wrong, if Torres ran into trouble, she wanted to be able to launch immediately. She headed to the flight line where her A-10 waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Rivera was already there, running final checks despite the early hour. "Thought you might show up," he said. "Just want to be ready," Sarah replied. "Just in case." "Aircraft's mission ready, Captain," Rivera said. "Say the word, and your wheels up in 5 minutes." Sarah climbed into the cockpit, settling into the familiar seat. She didn't start the engines, didn't power up the systems. She just sat there, waiting, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten with the approaching dawn. Somewhere out there, Marines were moving into position, and somewhere in the operations center, Colonel Bradford was monitoring the mission, confident that any jet would work. But Sarah knew better. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the mountains, she had a feeling that before this day was over, Colonel Bradford was going to learn exactly why the A-10 Thunderbolt II had earned its reputation as the finest close air support aircraft ever built. The operations center buzzed with controlled activity as the mission clock counted down. Sarah stood near the back of the room, technically off-duty, but unable to stay away. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from satellites, drone cameras, and ground unit positions. Colonel Bradford sat in the command chair, his eyes moving between displays with practiced efficiency. Through the radio speakers, Torres's voice came through clearly. "Viper 1-3, airborne and proceeding to target area. Weather conditions are marginal but manageable." Bradford leaned forward slightly. "Copy that, Viper 1-3. Ground units report they're 15 minutes from line of departure. Maintain holding pattern until they signal go." Sarah listened to the exchange, her hands clasped behind her back to keep from showing her nervousness. The weather satellite imagery on the screen showed exactly what she had feared. The fog bank was thicker than the morning forecast had predicted, and the wind indicators suggested strong cross-currents in the valley. 20 minutes passed. The Marines reached their staging point without incident. Their commander, Captain Dave Henderson, came over the radio with his characteristic Texas drawl. "Warhammer actual to air support. We're in position and ready to move. How's our cover looking? Torres responded first. Viper 1-3 has you covered, Warhammer. I'm at Angels 12, 5 miles north of your position. Weather's getting thick down there. But I have you on sensors. Angels 12 meant 12,000 feet. Sarah did the math in her head. The valley floor was at roughly 6,000 feet, and the surrounding peaks reached over 10,000. Torres was flying above the mountains, which made sense for an F-18's approach profile. But it also meant he was separated from the Marines by a layer of fog and potentially 6,000 feet of altitude. Roger that, Viper, Henderson replied. Appreciate the eyes. We're moving in now. Sarah watched the ground unit icons begin to move on the digital map. The Marines advanced in a standard tactical formation, their vehicles spread out to minimize vulnerability. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded smoothly. The convoy moved through the valley entrance, navigating the rough terrain with practiced skill. Then the radio crackled with a different voice, tense and urgent. Contact! We have contact! RPGs from the Eastern Ridge! The operations center erupted in controlled chaos. Bradford was on his feet immediately, barking orders. Viper 1-3, ground units taking fire from grid coordinates. He rattled off the numbers quickly. Torres's voice came back, and Sarah could hear the strain in it. Viper 1-3, Roger. I'm coming around for a pass. Visibility is poor. I need talk-on from ground units. Sarah's heart sank. Talk-on meant Torres couldn't see the target clearly and needed the Marines to guide him in using descriptions and positions. In good conditions, this worked fine. In fog-choked mountain valleys with enemy fire pouring down, it was a nightmare. Henderson's voice cut through the chatter. Viper. They're in the rocks about 200 meters up the eastern slope. Multiple positions. We need immediate suppression. I'm coming in hot, Torres responded. Sarah could picture him diving from altitude, trying to get below the weather. His aircraft screaming down at hundreds of miles per hour. The F-18 was built for speed, but speed in these conditions was both an asset and a liability. I can't get a visual, Torres said, frustration clear in his voice. The fog is too thick below 9,000 feet. I'm going to have to make a high-altitude pass based on coordinates. Bradford's jaw clenched. High-altitude bombing in close proximity to friendly forces was dangerous. The margin for error was razor-thin. Viper 1-3. What's your confidence level on target acquisition? There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Then Torres said, Sir, honestly, it's maybe 60%. The weather is worse than predicted, and I can't maintain visual contact with the ground units. More gunfire erupted over the radio. The Marines were pinned down, taking sustained fire from elevated positions. Sarah could hear the desperation creeping into Henderson's voice. We need that air support now. We've got wounded, and we can't advance or retreat without cover. Bradford looked at the screens, his face tight with the weight of command. He glanced back at Sarah, and for a moment, their eyes met. She saw the calculation happening behind his gaze. Pride warred with pragmatism. He had been so certain that any jet would work, that the mission profile was straightforward enough for his preferred aircraft. But reality was proving different. The fog, the terrain, the close proximity of friendly forces, all these factors were conspiring against the high-speed approach that the F-18 required. Viper 1-3, abort your attack run, Bradford said suddenly. Hold position and maintain overwatch. Sir? Torres sounded confused. The ground units need immediate support. I'm aware, Captain, Bradford replied, his voice tight. He turned to the communications officer. Get Captain Mitchell on the radio. Now. Sarah was already moving toward the door before anyone could say her name. She had been waiting for this moment, hoping it wouldn't come, but prepared for it nonetheless. She sprinted across the tarmac toward her A-10, where Rivera stood waiting beside the aircraft like he had known this was inevitable. Go get him, Captain, Rivera said, snapping a salute as she climbed the ladder. Sarah strapped in with movements so practiced they were automatic. Her hands flew across the switches and controls, bringing the A-10 to life. The twin turbofans spooled up with their distinctive whine, and she felt the aircraft settle around her like a second skin. Hawkeye 1-1, requesting immediate clearance for emergency launch, she transmitted, her voice calm despite her racing heart. The tower controller's response came instantly. Hawkeye 1-1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Winds are 270 at 15, gusting to 25. Godspeed. The A-10 wasn't fast. It would never be fast. But as Sarah released the brakes and felt the aircraft begin to roll, she knew that speed wasn't what those Marines needed right now. They needed accuracy. They needed someone who could get down in the dirt with them, who could see what they saw, who could put ordnance exactly where it needed to go without risking friendly fire. She climbed out from Kandahar, pushing the throttles forward. The A-10 accelerated with determined steadiness, rather than the violent thrust of a fighter jet, but it climbed, and it carried enough firepower to turn the tide of any ground battle. Hawkeye 1-1 airborne, she transmitted. En route to target area. ETA, 12 minutes. Bradford's voice came over the radio, and Sarah detected something she hadn't heard before resignation mixed with hope. Hawkeye 1-1. Ground units are taking sustained fire. Weather conditions are below minimums for high-altitude approaches. You'll need to get low. That's what the Warthog does best, sir, Sarah replied. She checked her navigation display, confirming her course toward the valley. Behind her, she knew Torres was still orbiting above the weather, frustrated and helpless despite having one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. The mountains rose ahead of her, their peaks disappearing into the gray soup of fog and clouds. Most pilots would see this as a wall, an impenetrable barrier that demanded respect and caution. Sarah saw it as her workplace. She descended as she approached the valley, letting the A-10 settle into the thick air at lower altitude. The fog wrapped around her canopy like a living thing, reducing visibility to almost nothing. She flew on instruments, trusting her training and her intimate knowledge of the terrain. Warhammer Actual, this is Hawkeye 1-1, she transmitted. I'm 2 minutes out. Give me a talk-on to your position. Henderson's voice came back, relief evident even through the stress. Hawkeye. We are in the center of the valley, taking fire from the eastern ridge at our 3 o'clock. Enemy positions are approximately 200 meters above our position, dug into the rocks. Copy that, Sarah said. She dropped lower, breaking through the bottom layer of fog at 7,000 feet. Suddenly, the valley floor appeared below her. Rocky and broken, she could see the Marine convoy, their vehicles clustered in a defensive position with smoke rising from multiple points. The A-10's design gave her exceptional visibility from the cockpit. She could see the battlefield laid out below her like a tactical map come to life. Muzzle flashes sparkled from the ridgeline where the Taliban fighters had positioned themselves. They had chosen, well, a natural fortress of boulders and crevices that provided excellent cover. But they had made one mistake. They had never faced an A-10 before. Sarah banked hard, feeling the G-forces press her into the seat. The Warthog responded instantly to her inputs. Agile, despite its ungainly appearance, she lined up on the ridge, cross-checking her position against the friendly forces below. The Marines were clear. She had a clean shot. Warhammer. Hawkeye is in hot. Announcing her attack run. Cleared hot. Henderson responded immediately. Sarah's finger found the trigger for the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. This was the heart of the A-10. The reason it existed. 7 barrels capable of firing 30mm rounds at a rate of 3,900 per round per minute. Each round was the size of a milk bottle. And they could shred armor, concrete, or rock with equal efficiency. She squeezed the trigger. The aircraft shuddered as the cannon roared to life. The sound was unique, a deep BRRRT that could be heard for miles. Sarah walked her fire across the ridgeline, watching the impact points march through the enemy positions. Boulders exploded. Rock faces shattered. The Taliban fighters who had felt so secure in their elevated positions suddenly found themselves exposed to a weapon system they couldn't hide from. She pulled up, banking around for another pass. Warhammer, I need damage assessment. Hawkeye, that was beautiful, Henderson shouted over the radio. Enemy fire has decreased significantly. We're seeing movement. They're trying to reposition. Roger that. I'm coming around again. Stay down. Sarah brought the A-10 through a tight turn that would have been impossible for a faster aircraft in this confined space. The valley walls rose on either side of her, close enough that she could see individual trees and rocks. But the Warthog didn't mind tight spaces. It thrived in them. Her second pass targeted the repositioning enemy fighters. She could see them moving between rocks, trying to find new firing positions. The cannon spoke again, and more of the ridge disappeared in clouds of pulverized stone and dust. The Taliban had brought RPGs and automatic weapons to this fight. Sarah had brought a flying tank with the most powerful cannon ever mounted on an aircraft. It wasn't a fair fight, and Sarah didn't care. Fair fights were for sports. This was about bringing her Marines home alive. After her third pass, the enemy fire had stopped completely. The survivors were fleeing deeper into the mountains, abandoning their weapons, and wounded. Henderson came back on the radio, his voice thick with emotion. Hawkeye, this is Warhammer Actual. Threat neutralized. You just saved our lives. We've got 3 wounded, but everyone's alive because of you. Sarah felt the familiar rush of relief and satisfaction. That's what I'm here for, Warhammer. Happy to help. Bradford's voice cut in, formal but with an undertone Sarah couldn't quite identify. Hawkeye 1-1, returned to base. Well done. As she climbed out of the valley, breaking back through the fog layer, Sarah saw Torres's F-18 orbiting above the weather. Nice shooting, Hawkeye, he transmitted. I had sensors on target, but I couldn't have made those passes safely. Well, thanks, Viper, Sarah replied. Different tools for different jobs. Yeah, Torres agreed. Definitely. The flight back to Kandahar gave Sarah time to decompress. Her hands were steady on the controls, but she could feel the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that followed combat missions. She had done what needed to be done, what she had known all along the A-10 could do. As she approached the airfield, she saw that word had spread. Ground crews were gathered near the flight line, and she could see Colonel Bradford standing among them, his arms crossed, watching her approach. Sarah brought the A-10 inches for landing, the aircraft settling onto the runway with the solid, reassuring thump that Warthog pilots knew well. As she taxied toward her parking spot, she could see the crowd gathered near the flight line had grown larger. Maintainers, other pilots, support staff, they all stood watching as her aircraft rolled to a stop. Rivera was there immediately, wheel chocks in hand. As the turbofans wound down and Sarah began shutting down systems, she could see him grinning like a proud father. She popped the canopy and the Afghan heat rolled in, a sharp contrast to the cool air at altitude. Captain, you should see the gun camera footage, Rivera called up to her. It's already spreading through the whole base. Best close air support run anyone's seen in months. Sarah climbed down the ladder, her legs slightly unsteady after the adrenaline dump. The ground felt solid and welcome beneath her boots. Several pilots approached, offering congratulations and backslaps. Even some of the F-16 pilots, who normally viewed the A-10 community with friendly rivalry, seemed genuinely impressed. But Sarah's attention was on Colonel Bradford, who stood apart from the group, his expression unreadable. He waited until the initial congratulations died down, then gestured for Sarah to follow him. My office, Captain. 5 minutes. The walk across the base gave Sarah time to prepare herself. She had disobeyed a direct order by launching without specific authorization. Even if that authorization had come seconds later over the radio, she had challenged Bradford's tactical decision in front of other officers, and she had been proven right in a very public way that might make the colonel look bad. Military careers had ended for less. Bradford's office was Spartan, decorated only with a few photographs of aircraft and a map of Afghanistan. He closed the door behind them and moved to stand behind his desk, but didn't sit down. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and Sarah stood at attention, waiting. At ease, Captain, he said finally. His voice was controlled, professional. But Sarah could detect the undercurrent of emotion beneath it. She relaxed slightly, shifting to a more comfortable stance, but remained silent. This was Bradford's show now. "I've been flying combat missions for 22 years, Bradford began, his eyes fixed on the map behind Sarah's head. "I've logged over 3,000 hours in fighter aircraft. I've flown in 3 different conflicts across 4 continents. I thought I understood air combat doctrine. I thought I knew which aircraft worked best for which missions." He paused, and his eyes finally met hers. "I was wrong. Not about everything, but about today. About that mission. About your aircraft." Sarah felt something shift in the room. This wasn't the dressing down she had expected. This was something else entirely. Bradford continued. "When I said any jet would work, I was thinking about the tactical objectives in abstract terms. Speed, firepower, technology. On paper, the F-18 was the logical choice. But war doesn't happen on paper, does it, Captain?" "No, sir," Sarah said quietly. "War happens in fog-filled valleys with Marines pinned down and taking fire. It happens in conditions where the weather doesn't care about your flight manual, and the enemy doesn't follow your carefully planned tactical approach." He moved around the desk, leaning against it. "I made a command decision based on what I knew, what I was comfortable with, and I almost got good people killed because of it." "Sir, Captain Torres is an excellent pilot," Sarah began. But Bradford held up his hand. "Torres is an excellent pilot. That's not in question. But he was in the wrong aircraft for that particular mission. You knew that. You tried to tell me that. And I wouldn't listen because of pride, I suppose. Because I believed that newer, faster, more advanced must always be better." He walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where the A-10 seconds sat among the sleeker fighter jets. The A-10 Thunderbolt II. Built in the 1970s, designed specifically for close air support, designed to fly low and slow, to survive ground fire, to deliver precision strikes in support of ground troops. It's not the fastest aircraft. It's not the newest. It doesn't have the most advanced avionics. But today, for that mission, it was exactly what we needed. Bradford turned back to face her. "I owe you an apology, Captain Mitchell. You were right, and I was wrong. More importantly, you had the courage to speak up when you saw a potential problem, even knowing it might damage your career. That takes guts." Sarah felt the tension she'd been carrying release slightly. "Thank you, sir. I was just trying to do what was best for the mission." "I know," Bradford said. "And that's exactly what a good officer should do. I should have listened more carefully. I should have considered your perspective instead of dismissing it." He moved back behind his desk and pulled out a file. "I've already spoken with Captain Henderson. The Marines are recommending you for a Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions today. They credit you with saving multiple lives and turning what could have been a disaster into a successful mission." "I was just doing my job, sir," Sarah said. "You were doing your job exceptionally well," Bradford corrected. "And more than that, you demonstrated exactly why we need diverse perspectives and capabilities in our air fleet. The A-10 community has been fighting for years to prove their aircraft is still relevant. Today, you proved it beyond any doubt." He sat down and gestured for Sarah to take a seat as well. The formality of the moment seemed to ease slightly. "I want you to know something, Captain. This morning, before the mission, there was talk at higher levels about retiring the A-10 fleet entirely. Budget cuts, modernization priorities, the usual arguments. I was actually asked to provide input on whether close air support could be effectively handled by multi-role fighters like the F-18 and F-16. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The debate about the A-10's future had been ongoing for years, but hearing it discussed so concretely was unsettling. "I was prepared to recommend transitioning away from the A-10, Bradford continued. "I thought the capabilities could be replicated by other aircraft. That was before today. Now, my report is going to say something very different. I'm going to tell them exactly what happened here, and why the A-10 remains an irreplaceable asset." "That means a lot, sir," Sarah said sincerely. Bradford leaned forward. But I need you to understand something, Captain. This isn't about one successful mission. It's about the bigger picture. The A-10 community needs to keep proving itself, keep demonstrating value, keep showing why this aircraft matters. Today was a perfect example. But it can't be the only example. I understand, sir. Good. He stood, and Sarah rose with him. You're dismissed, Captain. Get some rest. You've earned it. And Mitchell? He extended his hand. Thank you. For speaking up. For being ready when we needed you. And for showing an old fighter jock that he still has things to learn. Sarah shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of a soldier who respected professionalism and skill regardless of where it came from. Thank you, sir. As she left his office and walked back into the bright Afghan sun, Sarah felt lighter than she had in days. The mission had been successful, the Marines were safe, and Bradford had not only admitted his mistake, but was actively working to support the A-10 program. Rivera was waiting near her aircraft, overseeing the post-flight inspection. How'd it go with the colonel? He asked. Better than expected, Sarah said with a smile. Much better. Over the next few days, the story of the mission spread throughout the base and beyond. The gun camera footage became something of a legend, showing the precise, devastating effectiveness of the A-10's cannon in close air support. Other pilots sought out Sarah to ask questions about the Warthog's capabilities, genuinely curious rather than dismissive. Torres found her in the mess hall 3 days after the mission. He sat down across from her, his meal tray clattering on the table. I've been thinking about what happened, he said, without preamble. Yeah? Sarah prompted. I spent my whole career in fast movers, F-18 seconds. Before that I flew F-16 seconds in training. I always thought close air support was just about getting to the target fast, dropping your ordnance, and getting out. But watching you work, seeing what you did in that valley, it changed my perspective. He picked at his food for a moment before continuing. The Marines didn't need speed. They needed someone who could maneuver in tight spaces, who could stay on station and deliver multiple strikes, who could see the battlefield clearly from low altitude. That's not what the F-18 is designed for. I mean, I could have made it work eventually. But you made it look easy. Because you were in the right tool for the job. The A-10 is pretty special, Sarah agreed. It really is, Torres said. And I'm glad Bradford saw that. I've heard rumors that he's actually fighting to keep the A-10 program funded now. Using your mission as a case study. I heard something similar. Sarah confirmed. Torres grinned. That must feel pretty good. Going from having your aircraft choice questioned to becoming the poster child for why that aircraft needs to stick around. It's not about me or the aircraft, Sarah said seriously. It's about giving the ground troops the best possible support. Sometimes that's an F-18. Sometimes it's an A-10. The important thing is having the right options available. Spoken like someone who's been on the receiving end of higher headquarters aircraft selection debates, Torres laughed. 2 weeks later, Captain Henderson and several of his Marines visited the airbase. Henderson sought out Sarah personally, insisting on buying her dinner at the mess hall, which was a purely symbolic gesture since all the food was free. But Sarah appreciated the thought. Captain Mitchell, I need you to understand something, Henderson said as they sat down. My guys, we've worked with air support before. Good pilots. Good aircraft. But what you did that day, it was different. You didn't just provide fire support. You got down there with us. You could see what we were seeing. You understood the situation because you were part of it, not just flying over it. One of the other Marines, a sergeant with a bandaged arm from the mission, nodded emphatically. Ma'am, when we heard that cannon, when we saw what it did to those positions, we knew we were going to make it home. That sound, that BRRRRT, that's the most beautiful sound a Marine can hear when they're pinned down. Sarah felt emotion tighten her throat. I'm just glad everyone made it back. Everyone made it back because of you, Henderson said firmly. And we wanted you to know that. We wanted you to know that what you do matters. That aircraft you fly, it matters. Don't let anyone tell you different." The conversation stayed with Sarah long after the Marines departed. It reminded her why she had fought so hard to fly the A-10 the first place. Why she had challenged Bradford despite the risk. Why the aircraft itself was worth preserving. A month after the mission, Sarah was called to another briefing. Bradford was there, along with several senior officers she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was formal, official. "Captain Mitchell," Bradford began. "These gentlemen are from Air Combat Command Headquarters. They've been reviewing the A-10 program and its future in the Air Force. They wanted to speak with you directly. Thanks for watching. There's like Hadding. They wanted to speak with you directly." A colonel with silver eagles on his shoulders stepped forward. "Captain, we've reviewed the after-action reports from your recent mission in Helmand Province. We've also reviewed Colonel Bradford's detailed analysis of why the A-10 was essential to mission success. We have some questions." For the next hour, Sarah answered questions about the A-10's capabilities, its strengths, its limitations, its role in modern combat. She was honest about the aircraft's age and the challenges it faced, but she was equally honest about what made it irreplaceable in certain situations. When the questioning ended, the senior colonel smiled slightly. "Captain, your passion for your aircraft is evident. More importantly, your professional competence and your willingness to advocate for the right tool for the job, regardless of personal consequences, is commendable. Officers like you are exactly what the Air Force needs." After the senior officers left, Bradford pulled Sarah aside. His expression had stiffened slightly, but there was warmth in his eyes. "They're not retiring the A-10 fleet," he said quietly, "at least not in the near term. Your mission, and others like it, made the case that we can't afford to lose that capability." "That's good news, sir," Sarah said. "It is," Bradford agreed. "And Captain, I learned something important from you. I learned that admitting when you're wrong, adapting to new information, and valuing expertise, regardless of where it comes from, those are the marks of good leadership. So thank you for that lesson." Sarah smiled. "Anytime, sir." Bradford's face broke into a rare grin. "Just try to make it less dramatic next time, will you? My heart can't take too many more missions like that one." "I'll do my best, sir," Sarah laughed. As she walked back to the flight line that evening, Sarah saw her, A-10 silhouetted against the setting sun. The aircraft that had been questioned, that had been deemed potentially obsolete, that Bradford had initially dismissed. The aircraft that had proven, once again, why it earned the loyalty and love of everyone who flew it or depended on it. She had challenged a colonel, risked her career, and stood up for what she believed was right. And in the end, she had been proven correct, not through politics or arguments, but through performance when it mattered most. The Warthog had landed first, had saved lives, and had secured its place in the fleet for at least a while longer. And sometimes, Sarah thought as she headed to her quarters, that was all you could ask for. To do the job right, with the right tools, and to make a difference when it counted. Colonel Bradford had said any jet would work. But when the fog rolled in and the Marines needed help, only one jet had truly worked. And everyone at Kandahar Airfield now knew exactly which one that was.